She feared marring a cruel vampire king. On the wedding night, he asked a question that changed her. The sun had long fled behind the mountains of Arindor, leaving the sky painted in shades of purple and black. Twilight lingered here as if reluctant to leave, and the city below was draped in shadows, where torchlight flickered like small, trembling stars. Lady Ilara's carriage rolled slowly through the winding streets, the wheels creaking under the weight of her thoughts. Each turn brought her closer to the dark castle that would be her new home. Her prison, she thought. Ilara's heart beat faster with each passing mile. She had heard the stories of King Kale, the vampire ruler who commanded fear across both human and immortal lands. Rumors told of his cruelty, of the way he could silence an entire room with a mere glance, of how even the bravest warriors had fallen in his courts. Yet even as terror gripped her, there was a strange pull she could not name. She gazed out of the carriage window at the spires of Kale's castle, jagged against the horizon like the teeth of some great beast. The air grew colder as they approached, carrying the faint scent of iron and stone, a warning she could not ignore. Her mind wandered to her family, now a shadow of its former pride. Her father had arranged this marriage not out of love but survival. "You will secure our house," he had said. "Even if it costs your happiness, even if it costs your heart." Ilara swallowed hard. Survival had a cruel way of demanding sacrifices that no heart could easily bear. She pressed her fingers against the window, feeling the cold glass as though it could shield her from the storm to come. The carriage stopped before the massive gates of the castle. Two silent guards, their faces hidden under polished helmets, nodded once before opening the doors. Ilara stepped down, her skirts brushing the wet stones, and her eyes widened at the grandeur of the hall. High ceilings stretched into darkness, and long black banners hung like mourning shrouds along the walls. The flicker of torches cast shadows that danced across marble floors. A figure appeared at the far end of the hall. He was taller than any man she had ever seen, his presence commanding yet strangely quiet. The air seemed to bend around him, heavy with power and danger. King Kale. He moved with a predator's grace, his eyes, dark and infinite, fixing on her with curiosity rather than hostility. Every tale she had heard about his cruelty collided with the reality of the man before her. There was darkness there, yes, but also a strange, restless sadness. "Lady Ilara," he said, his voice smooth as silk but edged with authority. "Welcome to my home." Her knees threatened to buckle, but she forced herself to stand tall. "Your Majesty," she replied, her voice trembling despite her efforts. Kale approached slowly, each step echoing in the vast hall. He stopped a few feet away, studying her as though he were measuring the weight of her soul. Then, in a tone that sent shivers down her spine, he asked a question she would never forget. "Do you truly know what you fear, or only what you are told?" Ilara's breath caught. She had expected threats, commands, perhaps even cold indifference. But this question, it was different. It pierced deeper than any sword. I fear," she began, unsure what words could contain the storm inside her. "I fear being powerless, being trapped." Kel's lips curved in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Fear is a guide as much as a chain," he said, turning to walk past her. His cloak trailed behind him, whispering against the marble floor. "Learn to understand it, and you may yet survive here. Fail, and it will consume you." He disappeared into the shadows of the hall, leaving Ilara trembling with more than fear. There was curiosity, too, the dangerous kind that stirred in the chest like wildfire. That night she was led to her chambers, a room as grand as it was cold. The walls were lined with dark velvet, and the windows opened to a view of the storm-tossed valley below. Candles flickered on a marble desk, their light casting dancing shapes across the room. Yet no warmth reached her heart. She paced slowly, trying to steel herself for the days to come. Sleep eluded her, replaced by visions of the king, his intense gaze, the quiet weight of his presence, and the unspoken sadness she had glimpsed beneath the mask of cruelty. She could not help but wonder who he truly was. Was he the monster whispered about in human tales, or something else entirely? The next morning the castle stirred with activity. Servants moved silently, carrying trays of food and folding fine linens. Knights patrolled the corridors, their armor gleaming despite the dim light. Elora followed her guide, each step echoing through the halls like a drumbeat marking her fate. She was brought to the throne room where Cale awaited. The room was vast, with vaulted ceilings and banners that told stories of battles fought long before her time. Cale sat upon a throne carved from black stone, his posture regal, his gaze fixed upon her with a weight that made her stomach twist. "Today begins your life in my court," he said, his voice low. "You may fear me, and that is natural. But understand this. Fear can teach you as much as it can bind you. The choice is yours." Elara nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I understand, Your Majesty." He rose, moving toward her with deliberate steps. "Then let us begin," he said, extending his hand. She hesitated but placed hers in his, feeling a coldness that went deeper than skin. It was as if touching him was touching the shadows themselves. Over the next hours, she was shown the castle's hidden passages, its libraries filled with ancient tomes, and halls where the walls themselves seemed to listen. Everywhere she looked, she felt the weight of history, the stories of power and fear that had shaped Culzean and the lands he ruled. And yet, there were moments that defied the darkness. Call would pause to show her a painting, a relic, or a view from the highest tower, his eyes softening ever so slightly. In these fleeting glimpses, Elara began to sense a complexity beyond cruelty. A man shaped by loss, by centuries of solitude, by a curse she did not yet understand. Days turned into nights, and with each passing moment, Elara's fear mingled with fascination. She watched Cale from a distance, noting how he moved through the castle like a shadow among shadows, commanding attention yet never seeking it fully. He was both terrifying and magnetic, a storm contained in human form. One evening the moon rose full and bright, bathing the castle in silver light. Elara found herself on the battlements looking over the valley below. The wind whipped her hair around her face, carrying the scent of rain and stone. She was not alone. Cale appeared silently at her side, his presence making her heart race. He did not speak at first. They simply stood together watching the world beneath them. Then he said softly, almost to himself, "Loneliness is the heaviest crown." Elara turned to him, her voice trembling. "Even for a king?" He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time she saw the weight he carried. Not the weight of power, but the weight of a heart encased in fear and regret. "Yes," he admitted, "even for a king." The night air grew colder, and yet neither of them moved to leave. There was an understanding forming between them, fragile, yet undeniable. It was not love, at least not yet, but a recognition of shared humanity in a world ruled by fear and darkness. As the wind howled around them, Cale finally spoke, turning to her with a question that would linger in her mind long after. "If you stay here with me, will you see me as I am, or only as the world tells you to see?" Elara's breath caught. She did not know the answer. Part of her wanted to flee, to return to the safety of what she had known. Yet another part, the part she did not dare name, wanted to stay, to uncover the truth hidden behind the shadowed eyes of the vampire king. She stood silently, her heart pounding in her chest. The night stretched around them, full of secrets and possibilities, of fear and fragile hope. And in that silence, a quiet understanding passed between them. Their lives were now bound together, not just by duty, but by the strange, delicate tension of fate. The castle seemed to exhale, as if aware of the choice that had been made, even without words. And as lightning flashed across the distant mountains, illuminating the spires in brilliant silver, Elara realized that her fear had not ended. It had only begun. The question lingered in her mind like a spell. Do you truly know what you fear, or only what you are told? And deep inside, she understood that the answer would shape not only her future, but the future of the cruel vampire king, and perhaps the fate of Arindor itself. The castle seemed alive at night, though not in the way a human home might be. The walls whispered of old secrets, the corridors sighed under the weight of countless footsteps long gone, and shadows shifted with a life of their own. Lady Alara walked carefully, her gown brushing the cold stones, her heart still trembling from the question King Kale had asked on their first night together. "Do you truly know what you fear, or only what you are told?" It had echoed in her mind ever since, twisting her thoughts. She had feared him, yes, but fear alone no longer seemed enough to describe the pull she felt. There was something deeper, a strange magnetism, a whisper beneath the terror, something human. The morning had begun with the usual routine. Servants moved silently, carrying trays of food and tidying chambers that smelled faintly of incense and old stone. Alara followed one of them to a library hidden deep within the castle, a place of shadows and dust where ancient tomes lined shelves that stretched toward the vaulted ceilings. Kale was already there, sitting at a dark wooden table, his posture stiff, hands folded before him. He did not glance up as she entered, yet the air shifted, heavy with presence. "Lady Alara," he said at last, his voice calm, measured. "I trust you have begun to learn the ways of this house." Alara bowed her head. "I try, Your Majesty. The castle is overwhelming, and the halls, they seem to watch me." Kale's lips quirked, almost imperceptibly. "They do. Every stone remembers. Every shadow remembers. And sometimes those memories can teach lessons that living teachers cannot." She felt a chill, but also curiosity. "What kind of lessons?" He lifted a hand, tracing the spine of a massive book, as if feeling the pulse of its history. "Patience, observation, courage. Sometimes the smallest action can change the course of a life, especially a life bound by fear." Alara's mind wandered. She thought of her journey to the castle, of the carriage rolling through the twilight streets, of the stories whispered about Kale's cruelty. And yet, here he was, speaking of lessons, of choices, as if the darkness surrounding him did not define him entirely. "You do not trust easily," she said, almost as if confessing to herself. He finally met her gaze, and she felt the weight of centuries behind his eyes. "Trust is dangerous," he admitted, "but so is fear. Perhaps more so because fear can be blind. And blind fear can destroy even the strongest hearts." They fell into silence, but it was not the uncomfortable silence of strangers. It was a quiet shared in understanding, a fragile bridge stretching between two lives that had never expected to meet. Later that day she wandered the corridors alone, her fingers brushing against the cold walls. The castle was labyrinthine, corridors twisting and turning, doors leading to places she could not imagine. She felt eyes on her, though she knew it could only be the castle itself, or perhaps the shadows that moved like living things. A sudden sound startled her, a soft rustle, a whisper of movement. She turned to see Kale leaning against the wall at the end of the hall. He had been following her silently, his presence barely more than a shadow. "You are learning," he said. "You notice things that others overlook." Alara's heart raced. "I do not know if that is courage or foolishness." He smiled faintly. "Perhaps both. And perhaps that is why you will survive here, when others would falter." She studied him carefully. There was danger in his words, yes, but also something else, something that made her feel simultaneously exposed and understood. Days passed in a rhythm of lessons and observation. Kale tested her carefully, asking questions that seemed simple at first, but carried weight beneath the surface. "If a servant is in danger, do you intervene, even if it could cost you?" he asked one afternoon, watching her closely. Alara hesitated, then answered, "I would, if I could help, without causing more harm." Kale nodded slowly. "And what if the harm cannot be avoided? Would you choose courage or safety?" The question lingered with her, echoing long after he had left. Every corner of the castle seemed to whisper back at her, challenging her, daring her to confront her own fears. She began to see patterns in Kale's behavior, moments of unexpected kindness, glimpses of mercy where cruelty was expected, a fleeting softness in his expression when no one else was watching. It unsettled her. It made her question what she had been told about him. Perhaps he was not simply a monster. Perhaps the stories were only fragments, distorted over time. One evening, the castle hosted a masked gathering, a night meant for the court to mingle under the silver glow of the moon. Alara wandered through the crowd, her heart pounding with every step. Masks hid faces, but not intentions. She felt eyes on her, and in the throng she glimpsed Cale. He was not standing on the dais as was expected of a king, but at the edge of the hall, observing silently. And then, without a word, he moved toward her, passing through the crowd like a shadow untethered from the world. He stopped beside her. "Do you see them?" he asked, gesturing subtly to the masked nobles, their laughter ringing hollow in the cavernous hall. "They are like the castle, shaped by rules, trapped by expectation, hiding who they truly are." Elara looked at him, captivated despite herself. "And you?" she asked softly. "Are you also trapped?" For the first time, Cale hesitated. His mask of authority faltered, revealing a trace of something fragile beneath. "I was," he said finally, "but perhaps not entirely." "Not with you." Her chest tightened. She had not expected confession. Not here. Not now. Fear mingled with an emotion she could not name, a dangerous warmth in the midst of cold shadows. The night deepened, and Cale led her to the highest tower, where the winds of the mountains whipped fiercely. Below them the city spread like a tapestry, the streets winding and dark. The moon cast silver light across the stones, and Elara felt the world stretch out, vast and impossible. "Why do you bring me here?" she asked, clutching the railing. "To show you," Cale said, his voice low and steady, "that there is more than fear in the world. Even in a castle built from shadows, even in a heart hardened by centuries, there is something else." She turned to him, searching his face. "Something else? Hope," he whispered. "Or perhaps connection. But it is fragile, and it must be handled carefully." The wind tugged at her hair, and in that moment she realized that Cale was not only testing her courage, he was testing her heart. And she did not know if she was ready to answer. That night, as she lay in her chambers, sleep came slowly. Her thoughts were filled with the shadows and whispers of the castle, and with the memory of Cale's eyes, dark and infinite, holding hers with an intensity that frightened and fascinated her all at once. She thought of the questions he had asked, the lessons hidden in his words, the kindness glimpsed in fleeting moments, and she wondered, could someone so feared, so cruel in the eyes of the world, also hold the capacity for change, for redemption, for love? The answer eluded her, and yet deep inside a spark of curiosity began to grow, threading through her fear like a fragile ribbon of silver. She knew that she was beginning a journey she could not yet understand, a journey that would challenge everything she believed about power, cruelty, and the human heart. And then, just before dawn, she heard it, a quiet knock at her door. She rose cautiously, her heart pounding, and opened it. Cale stood there, unannounced, the moonlight casting long shadows behind him. There was no threat in his posture, only a strange vulnerability that made her breath catch. "I do not always visit," he said softly. "But sometimes the night reveals truths that the day cannot." Elara stepped aside to let him enter. She did not know why she allowed him, only that some invisible force drew her to his presence, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something far more complicated. Cale looked around the chamber, eyes lingering on the small details she had arranged with care. Then he turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Do you know why I test you?" he asked. "Why I watch you, observe your choices?" Elara shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not know." "Because," he said, stepping closer, "I need to know if you are different, if you can see me, truly see me, beyond the fear, beyond the stories. And I need to know if I can see you in return." Her chest tightened. She could not speak. She felt as though the castle itself had fallen silent, listening to the fragile truth of this moment. And then he left, as silently as he had come, leaving her with the echo of his words and a heart that could no longer remain entirely hers alone. Outside the wind howled, carrying the scent of rain and stone. And deep within the shadows of the castle, Elara understood that her life had irrevocably changed. Fear was no longer the only force shaping her path. Curiosity, fascination, and the faintest glimmer of hope had begun to weave into the fabric of her heart. And with that, the castle seemed to breathe around her, full of secrets, full of shadows, and full of possibilities she had never imagined. The castle of Arendor had grown quieter in the days since the masked gathering. Shadows clung more heavily to the corridors, and even the wind seemed reluctant to stir, as though it feared disturbing the fragile tension that had taken root between Lady Alara and King Cale. Alara wandered the halls alone, her thoughts restless. She had seen glimpses of Cale's humanity, moments when his cruelty seemed almost like a mask, when his gaze softened at a servant's plea or lingered on some detail others might not notice. And yet the rumors, the stories of fear and violence, haunted her mind. She could not fully reconcile the man she was beginning to understand with the monster the world warned her about. Her steps carried her to the castle's ancient library, where the scent of old parchment filled the air. She ran her fingers along the spines of the tomes, some so old they seemed brittle, as if they might crumble to dust at a careless touch. She paused at a thick volume bound in black leather, its cover etched with symbols she did not recognize. Cale appeared behind her without a sound, as though he had been summoned by her thoughts alone. She started slightly, but did not step back. Instead, she felt a strange calm at his presence, a recognition that this was a man who had walked centuries alone, yet somehow wished to be seen. "You are drawn to knowledge," he said softly, to understanding the past. "Why?" Elara hesitated. "Because I want to know the truth about this castle, about you, about everything they tell me to fear." Cale studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said quietly, "The truth is heavier than you imagine. Some knowledge can free you, some can break you." "I would rather face the truth than live in fear," she replied firmly, her voice carrying a weight she had not expected from herself. He nodded. "Very well. Then perhaps it is time you see what is hidden beneath the stories." He led her to a narrow spiral staircase, winding down into the bowels of the castle. The air grew colder, and the faint smell of iron reached her nose. At the bottom they entered a chamber she had never seen, a crypt of black stone lit by candles that cast flickering shadows across carved walls. The room was filled with relics, some of them ancient and strange, others almost human in appearance. "This is where the curse began," Cale said, his voice low, almost reverent, "where the weight of my cruelty was born." Elara listened, her heart tightening. "A curse," he nodded. "Centuries ago, I was betrayed by someone I loved. I tried to protect what was mine, and in doing so, I became what they feared. I cannot love freely, for if I do, I lose control. If I show compassion without restraint, it destroys everything I touch." She felt a chill run through her veins, but also a deep sympathy. She had always believed he was cruel because he enjoyed it. Now, she saw that his cruelty had been a shield, a way to survive a world that had shown him betrayal and loss at every turn. "Then everything I've seen, the kindness, the mercy, it's rare?" she asked softly. Cale's gaze fell to the floor. "Rare and dangerous. It is why I watch you, Alara. You are not like the others. You are not afraid in the way they are. You do not flee, and yet you do not worship me blindly. That is unusual." Elara swallowed, her heart aching with conflicting emotions. "And yet I still fear you," she admitted. "Because even with the truth, the shadows remain." Cale stepped closer and she felt the cold emanating from him, yet also something else, a pull, subtle and irresistible. "Fear is natural," he said. "It keeps you alive, but it must not rule you. To survive here, you must see beyond fear. You must see me, not as the world tells you, but as I am. And as I could be." For the first time she saw him not as a king, not as a predator, but as a man trapped in his own centuries-old pain. Her chest tightened with a mixture of fear and compassion, and for a moment she thought she could reach out, touch the shadowed heart behind those eyes. Days passed, and their interactions became a careful dance of observation and restraint. Kale tested her courage, asking subtle questions that revealed not just her wisdom, but her strength of heart. She learned to notice the nuances in his expressions, the flicker of hesitation when he faced difficult choices, the rare moments of vulnerability when no one else was present. One afternoon, he brought her to the castle gardens, a rare expanse of green hidden within the dark walls. The sunlight was weak, filtered through the high towers, but it fell on the flowers and fountains like silver dust. Kale moved slowly, as if walking through memories rather than present time, his eyes distant. "Do you see it?" he asked. "Even here, beauty can exist in darkness." Elara nodded, her gaze following his. "Yes, even in shadows, light finds a way." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time the wall of centuries seemed to crack. "You understand more than most. You see the world as it is, not only as it fears it to be. That is why I wish to protect you." The words struck her, unexpected and unsettling. She had been cautious, guarded, yet in that moment she felt the weight of connection, fragile and terrifying. That evening, a storm rolled over the mountains. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and rain beat against the windows with relentless rhythm. Elara could not sleep. She wandered the halls, feeling the castle respond to the storm, the stones vibrating with echoes of power and history. She found Kale in the highest tower, staring out into the night. Lightning illuminated his face, revealing a mixture of resolve and longing that made her heart tremble. "You cannot run from the storm," he said without turning. "It comes for everyone, whether they are ready or not." "No," she replied, "but we can choose how we face it." He turned to her, and the storm reflected in his eyes like fire and shadow intertwined. "I have faced storms longer than you can imagine," he said, "and yet I find myself wondering, for the first time, if there is something worth risking for." Elara felt her breath catch. The words carried the weight of centuries and the fragility of a single human heart. She understood then that Kale's curse was not just a matter of magic. It was a matter of trust, of connection, of allowing another to see him fully, without fear or judgment. I do not know if I can help," she whispered, "but I want to try." He stepped closer, their shadows merging in the candlelight. "Then perhaps," he said softly, "you will be the one to teach me what it means to live again." And in that moment, the storm outside seemed to pause, as if the world itself had sensed the fragile bond forming between them. It was not love, not yet. It was something quieter, deeper, a recognition of humanity, of shared pain, of the possibility of redemption. But the castle held its secret still. As the storm raged, a distant echo reached them, faint yet unmistakable, the stirrings of forces beyond their control, of curses older than either of them, of choices yet to be made. Elara's heart pounded with both fear and anticipation. She knew that the path she had begun to walk with Kale was dangerous, uncertain, and full of shadow. But she also knew that she could not turn away. In the silence of the tower, Kale's voice broke the moment, quiet and intense. "If you stay with me, knowing all I am, can you forgive what I've done, and what I might become?" Elara's breath caught. The question was a key, a challenge, and a confession, all at once. She could not answer, not fully, not yet. But the very asking bound them together, two souls standing on the edge of fear and hope, staring into the unknown. As the storm lashed against the castle, Elara understood something she could not yet name. She was no longer merely a visitor in Kale's world. She had stepped into it fully and irrevocably, and the journey they had begun together would change them both forever. And deep within the shadows, the castle seemed to hum with anticipation, as if aware that the fragile beginnings of trust and understanding had begun to awaken forces that could reshape the lives of both the cruel vampire king and the human woman who dared to see him as more than his fearsome reputation. The castle of Arendor was silent that night, as though the stones themselves were holding their breath. The storm from previous days had passed. leaving the air sharp and clean, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant mountains. Lady Alara moved through the halls with quiet purpose, her heart beating like a drum against her ribs. She knew that what awaited her was not simply a meeting with King Cale. It was a reckoning, both for him and for herself. Cale awaited her in the throne room, a room stripped of its usual grandeur for the moment. Candles burned low along the edges, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to stretch across the floor like dark fingers. He sat upon the black stone throne, tall and regal. Yet there was a tension in his shoulders, a restlessness in his gaze that betrayed the weight he carried. "Alara," he said, his voice low, carrying both command and invitation. "You have come." She nodded. "I could not stay away. Not now. Not when I know what must be faced." He rose, moving closer, and she noticed the faint tremor in his hands. The first sign of vulnerability she had seen in him during days of careful observation. "You have courage," he said softly, "and a heart that sees truth, even when it frightens you. That is why you are here." Alara took a steadying breath. "And you? Are you ready to face the truth about yourself?" Cale's eyes darkened, a storm contained within them. "I have no choice," he admitted. "The curse that has shaped my life, my actions, it must be faced, or it will consume everything I touch, including you." She stepped forward. "Then we face it together. I will not let you walk alone in darkness." For a long moment silence stretched between them. The throne room felt like the heart of the world itself, still and waiting, as though it knew that the next hours would decide the fates of both human and vampire alike. Cale led her to the center of the room, where an ancient circle was etched into the black stone floor. Symbols unfamiliar to her glowed faintly, resonating with a power older than she could imagine. Candles were placed at precise points, and a small pool of silver water shimmered in the middle. "This is the ritual," Cale explained. "It will confront the curse that binds me. It is not simple. It requires trust, honesty, and courage beyond fear."
Alara nodded, feeling both awe and apprehension.
"I trust you," she said, though the words felt fragile in the vast, shadowed room. He looked at her then, his gaze softened. "And I trust you, Alara, more than I have trusted anyone in centuries." They began. Cale moved through the circle, tracing the symbols with long, deliberate fingers, and chanting words in a language that seemed older than time itself. Alara mirrored his movements as best she could, following instinct and intuition, her heart beating with every syllable. The air thickened, charged with energy. Shadows swirled around them, rising from the corners of the room as though the castle itself were alive. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and for a moment fear surged through Alara. She looked at Cale, and in his eyes she saw the same tension, the same struggle. This was no act of power. It was an act of courage, a test of their hearts. "Do not falter," Cale whispered. "Focus on truth. Focus on trust." Alara closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She thought of the days spent learning his rhythms, noticing his hidden kindness, witnessing his pain behind the mask of cruelty. She thought of the moments they had shared, the quiet confessions, the unspoken understanding, the fragile glimmer of hope. And then she spoke, her voice clear and strong, even in the charged silence. "I see you, Cale. Not as the world tells me, not as the whispers fear, but as you truly are. I see your pain. I see your loss. I see the man behind the shadow." Cale's hands faltered, the circle flickering with sudden intensity. "And I see you, Alara," he replied, his voice trembling. "You are not afraid in the way others are. You see me, and yet you do not recoil. You do not flee. You accept what I am and what I have been." The circle glowed brighter, and the shadows rose higher, coiling around them like living smoke. Alara felt a pull in her chest, a force testing her courage, her resolve, her very heart. But she held fast, her eyes locked on Cale's, feeling the bond between them strengthen with every moment. Cale raised his arms, chanting words she could not understand, and the silver pool at the center began to ripple and shine. Images appeared on the surface. A young Kale, betrayed by a friend he had loved. A village burned, faces twisted in fear and accusation. The curse had been born from loss, anger, and the endless isolation that followed. Tears pricked Alara's eyes, but she did not look away. "You are not your past," she said firmly. "You are not the fear. You are more than the curse, and I will not leave you." Kale's head bowed, and for the first time she saw pure vulnerability in him. "It has been so long since someone believed that," he admitted. "So long since anyone dared to see me differently." The room trembled once more, and the shadows threatened to overwhelm them. Alara reached for Kale's hand, and he took it without hesitation. The circle flared with silver light connecting them. Their hearts, their trust, their courage intertwined, and a wave of energy washed over the room. For a moment everything was chaos. Light, shadow, thunder, and power swirling together. And then, as suddenly as it began, the storm of magic subsided. The circle dimmed, the shadows receded, and the candles burned steady once more. Kale looked at Alara, his eyes bright, alive in a way they had not been in centuries. "The curse, it is weakened," he whispered. "You have done this. Your courage, your truth, it has changed me." Alara's chest heaved with relief. "No," she said softly. "We did this together." For a long moment they simply stood, hands clasped, hearts beating in quiet triumph. The castle, once heavy with darkness, now felt lighter, as though the walls themselves recognized the change. Kyle stepped closer, and Alara felt the warmth radiating from him. Not the cold she had feared, but a genuine pulse of life, of possibility. "Alara," he said, voice low, almost a whisper, "you asked nothing of me, and yet you have saved me entirely. Tell me, do you still fear me?" She looked into his eyes, the shadows of the past now tempered by trust and understanding. She did not falter. "I do not fear you, Kale. Not anymore. There is something else now, something stronger than fear." He drew a slow breath, relief and awe mingling in his expression. "And that is hope," he said. The storm outside had returned in whispers, not in fury. Rain tapped gently against the windows, a soft symphony in the quiet castle. Kale and Alara stood together in the throne room, not as king and subject, but as two souls who had faced darkness and emerged with courage, trust, and connection. Alara finally understood what the castle had been trying to teach her all along. That fear was never the end but the beginning of understanding. That even the cruelest hearts could be reached by truth and compassion, and that love, though quiet, fragile, and uncertain, could bloom even in the shadows. Kale spoke again, his voice steady and calm. "You have given me more than I could have imagined. A chance to be whole. And in return, I offer you a life that is no longer ruled by fear, but by choice, by trust, by hope." Alara smiled faintly, feeling the weight of centuries lift from both their hearts. "Then we begin anew," she said. "Together!" He extended his hand, and she took it without hesitation. As they stood there, bathed in the soft candlelight, the castle itself seemed to exhale, acknowledging the change. The shadows were no longer threats but witnesses, and the rooms no longer whispered fear but the promise of a future shaped by courage, understanding, and trust. The journey was far from over. Challenges awaited, both from beyond the castle walls and within their own hearts. But for the first time, Alara knew that they could face them, not as king and bride bound by duty, but as equals, bound by courage, truth, and the fragile yet undeniable spark of love that had begun to grow between them. And outside, the dawn broke over Arendor, pale light spilling over the mountains and valleys, touching the castle with warmth. For the first time in centuries, the vampire king and the human woman who had dared to see him truly were not defined by fear, curse, or cruelty. They were defined by the choice to trust, to change, and to stand together. The castle of Arendor had begun to heal, and so had they.